Good afternoon. Let me start by acknowledging the chair of the African Movement Rwanda chapter, the ambassadors here present, members of the Rwandese cabinet here present, the ladies and gentlemen who are here, and the students that I have seen. And let me at the very outset say how pleased I am to be invited to be with you this afternoon on the occasion of the commemoration of African liberation on this 25th day of May, the year 2017. Many of you will remember that around this time, in the year 1963, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, 32 heads of states and government of the then independent African countries met at the invitation of the then Ethiopian leader, Haile Selassie. And you will remember the many speeches that were given on that day to celebrate the liberation of Africa. Many African leaders whom we must remember if we claim to be Pan-Africanists spoke on that day. From the West, we must remember leaders such as Mali's Modibo Keita. We must remember leaders such as Felix Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire. We must remember leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. We must also remember the other leaders from East Africa, such as Tanzania's Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, and many other leaders who were present on that day. And there were only 32 independent African countries. But it must also be remembered that at that conference, the liberation movements that were struggling for independence were also represented. Kenya was represented because she had not attained her independence. The South African People's Organization, which later helped gain the independence in what is now Namibia, was represented. Frelimo was represented for the people of Mozambique. The people of Angola were represented. The African National Congress from South Africa was represented. And when we as Africans gather here today to pose the question of our liberation, it would only be fair that we are familiar with the events of that day, because history has demonstrated once without number that if a people have no sense of history, they can never have a sense of the future. And therefore, if we want to talk about Africa, we must ask ourselves the critical question: do we know where we have come from? The chairman, in his introduction, has said that Africans have been victimized through slavery. Africans have been victimized through the colonial project. And Africans are being victimized, even as I speak, through the neo-colonial project. And yet, somehow, we claim to be independent. Somehow, because we have flags, we claim to be independent. Somehow, because we have national anthems, we claim to be independent. Somehow, because we have black-skinned people leading our governments, we claim to be independent. But the question is, are we independent? And the reason why we are gathered here today is to ask ourselves the fundamental question: are Africans independent in the manner that was contemplated by the founding fathers? I remember so very vividly in his speech on the day of the independence of Ghana, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah saying that until the day that all African countries are independent, the independence of Ghana has no meaning and has no value. Today, when we count independent African countries, we count 54 of them, with the youngest of them being South Sudan. And you and me know that that country is undergoing great pain. So many people are questioning, for what reason did we attain our independence? For what reason did we struggle for independence? Of course, it is right to say that many strides have been made. But before we talk about the changes that have taken place in Africa, let us remind ourselves of the state of Africa. As I stand before you here today, many African countries are experiencing pain. In Mozambique, the struggle between Renamo and Frelimo is alive and well, and the Mozambicans may be enjoying themselves in Maputo and Nampula, but the country is not at ease. We will remind ourselves in Angola that there is a government of the MPLA, but the truth be told, the strain of the struggle between MPLA and UNITA still presents pain in different ways. Right now, as I speak to you, in Zimbabwe, that country that we thought had many hopes for us, that country of Robert Gabriel Mugabe, is unique for being one of the few countries in the world that does not even have a currency of its own. And the unemployment rate is 90%. Right now, as I speak to you, even South Africa is not at ease because the last colonial question, the land question, has never been resolved. And that is true of Namibia. Right now, even in Equatorial Guinea, that country that claims to have the highest per capita income in Africa, that country is not at ease. And there is a sense in which if you go to Zambia, the only country in the world that I know where when an opposition leader obstructs a president, he is deemed to have committed the offense of treason. Even Zambia is not at ease. Right now, as I speak to you, even in Malawi, they cannot feed themselves. In my own country, Kenya, we are mobilizing ourselves on the basis of ethnicity. We vote not because we will elect leaders who will serve us, but we ask ourselves whether they are Luos, Kambas, or Kikuyus. In Somalia, the country is not at ease. In Central African Republic, the country is not at ease. The war is even forgotten. It never occupies the front pages of the newspaper. The Democratic Republic of Congo, a country that has as a part of its name democratic, but is not democratic at all. One of the countries which is the richest resource country on earth, and yet it is the poorest country on earth. We go to different parts in Niger, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Eritrea. So our continent is not at ease. Our continent is not at ease. That is why our young men and women are dying on a daily basis, trying to cross the Mediterranean to go to Europe to be enslaved of their own volition. That is the Africa that we are speaking about. We are speaking about Africa whose leaders on the eve of independence promised us that they will improve our education system. Yet those leaders today in many African countries, they create education systems which they will never allow their children to attend. Yet those leaders have hostels, and when they are sick, they go to Europe. If they were colonized by Belgium, they go to Brussels. If they were colonized by the British, they go to London. If they were colonized by the French, they go to Paris. If they were colonized by the Portuguese, they go to Lisbon. And if they were colonized by the Spaniards, they go to Madrid. There is a sense in which our independence is nothing but flag independence. We may humor ourselves and claim that we are independent, but we must interrogate ourselves. In other words, on an occasion such as this, when we engage in an exercise of stock-taking, we must ask ourselves the fundamental basic question: are we on the right path? Yet, we cannot deny that since we attained independence, there are few things that we have done right. We have built more schools. We have more health centers. We have many universities. We have many agricultural institutions. But yet I can submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we still have no faith in them. Your typical educated African will celebrate Harvard in the United States, the Sorbonne in France, Cambridge in the United Kingdom, but never the University of Rwanda. There is a sense in which our minds are colonized. Today, we have China, and I do not begrudge the Chinese. They know what they want. It is we who do not know what we want. 30 years ago, China was a backwater country which could not feed herself. Today, it is the factory of the world. Today, there is not a single African country of the 54 of them in which the Chinese are not building a stadium or building a road or building something or erecting Confucius institutions in our universities. We of the middle class, our lives are not complete now unless your child learns Kinyarwanda, English, and Mandarin. That is how we are moving, even as we are celebrating African Liberation Day. So today, we come here to celebrate independence because we must. It was a good step. But yet there is a sense in which we must remind ourselves. I remember a good friend of mine who is a leader of one of the African countries told me something several years ago. There's a thing called democracy, which is about electing people in Africa, only produces leaders who do not love Africa. And he reminded me, is it not lost on you that the leaders who have succeeded in transforming Africa in the last 25 years initially did not get into power through the democratic means? And I started asking myself whether that was true or not. And after reminding myself, I discovered that indeed it was true. I discovered that when Uganda's Yoweri Museveni attempted to compete in an electoral process in the 1980, he could not be elected until his guerrilla movement took power in 1986. He succeeded, whether we like it or not, with his comrades in transforming Uganda and creating some stability. I then reminded myself that Mele Zenawi of Ethiopia had to acquire power in 1984 through a guerrilla movement. I reminded myself that Rwanda's own Paul Kagame and his comrades had to ride on the crest of the unfortunate event of the genocide in order to take power and demonstrate that countries could be led properly. I reminded myself that in Burkina Faso, the young Thomas Sankara had to take power through a coup d'etat in order to demonstrate that things could be done properly. I reminded myself that Desiree Kabila in the Democratic Republic of Congo, then Zaire, had to acquire power through force of arms, courtesy of the assistance of Uganda's Yoweri Museveni and Rwanda's Paul Kagame. There is a sense in which when we are talking about Africa, we must now begin to interrogate this thing called democracy. Is there not a time now that we must ask ourselves that we can have democracy that is brewed in the African pot, a democracy that responds to African realities? This is the question that we fear to pose and fear to answer because it is unsettling. But is it not true that there comes a time in the lives of a people that they must ask difficult questions and get difficult answers? I'm submitting to us that indeed on a day such as this, we must pose and answer such difficult questions. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not lost on me that you are debating about the role of the media. The question is, do we have an African media? We have individuals who are Africans, who are dark-skinned, who claim to be journalists. But are they journalists in the true sense of the word? Today, if you look at your typical African newspaper, the news is packaged by Reuters, Xinhua, and the images are from Getty. Africans do not create their own news. And the truth, therefore, is that the African journalist must begin to ask the question, are you serving Africa or you are simply an instrument of foreign influence? These are issues that we must ask ourselves. Africans today have learned to enjoy what they do not produce and to produce what they do not enjoy. You go into very many African households and you ask them on matters as mundane as music, they are able to tell you and to recite the names of all European musicians. But if you ask Rwandese the name of a single Kenyan musician, they do not know and they do not care. You ask Rwandese the name of a single Tanzanian musician, they do not know and they do not care. You ask a Rwandese or a Malawian if they do know the president of Malawi, they do not know and they do not care. But you ask them, what dress did Melania Trump wear yesterday? They'll tell you it was black. When a people's minds have been so colonized, such a people cannot realize their potential. When you ask them about football, when you ask the typical Kenyan, do you know any football club in Rwanda? They do not know and they do not care. But many of you here, last night you are awake in order to watch Manchester United and Ajax Amsterdam because you have been colonized in your minds. When a people are so colonized in matters as mundane as those, I can assure you that Europe and America does not have to worry about us. They can sit in Paris and they know exactly how we are going to behave. They can sit in Washington and they can predict how we are going to behave. I'm submitting to us that if Africa is to be great, and Africa can be great, Africa must move in the direction of integration. On a day such as this, I remember so very vividly the passionate appeal of Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah at Africa Hall in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He was as eloquent as he was passionate in asking the leaders assembled there, we must not move out of here without a single currency, Kwame Nkrumah said. We must not move out of here without a single army, Kwame Nkrumah said. We must not move out of here without a single government. We must not move out of here without unity, because if we get used to our independence, it will be difficult to unite us. Nobody listened to Kwame. And because nobody listened to Kwame, we are now 54 desperate countries. Rwanda's economy is doing very well, and I commend President Paul Kagame and his comrades, but your GDP is only slightly above 13 billion United States dollars. That is less than half of the endowment fund of the University of Harvard, which stands at 34 billion United States dollars. In other words, we are running Mickey Mouse economies. These are economies that cannot make us realize our potential. So that even when we say that the Burundian economy is growing, what economy does Burundi have? With a GDP of 3 billion United States dollars, Donald Trump has more money than all Burundians combined. And we talk about Malawi with an economy of 13 billion. Bill Gates has more money than Malawi. We talk about Kenya with a GDP of 60 billion United States dollars. Oh, I can tell you that that is smaller than the economy of Washington, D.C., which stands at $189 billion with a population of only 800,000. And I'm submitting to us that we of the Negroid race who are assembled here today, if we do not answer to the call of the founding fathers, we will be colonized again. And this time round, the colonization will not constitute some white men coming from Brussels to be here in Rwanda, or some white men coming from the United Kingdom. No, you will have black skins doing the bidding of white skins. And we can only immunize ourselves if we realize that the time has come that we must ask ourselves what it is that we must do. You know, many times I think about Africa. And I look at Africa, and I look at a country such as South Sudan, which attained our independence only the other day. And the leaders of South Sudan, in their estimation, in their wisdom, and in my submission, in their lack of wisdom, hold the view that being a Nuer is a very important thing, that being a Dinka is a very important thing, that being a Chuluk is a very important thing, and they are destroying the country, and yet they call themselves presidents. John Garang Dimabiar must be turning in his grave. And we are proving the whites right every moment. We told you the Negroid cannot govern himself. On the available evidence in South Sudan, we are saying the same thing, yet we claim that we were liberated. We cannot be nice to each other for too long. You go to Eritrea, a country with great promise. Rock of Ages, Isaiah Afwerki, has refused to move off the stage. Yet the wisdom of age says that no matter how good a dancer you are, there must come a time for you to leave the stage to allow other dancers to entertain the audience. Isaiah Afwerki has refused. And there is no shortage of Eritreans running to Sweden, to Norway, to Finland, to the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the day of the celebration of African liberation. Are we truly liberated? These are painful questions that we must ask ourselves. Yet there is one thing that I believe, and it has been demonstrated by a few African leaders, that Africans have the capacity to lead. Rwanda's Paul Kagame and his comrades, riding on the crest of one of the most heinous acts since the World War II, 1 million dead in 100 days, 10,000 dying on a daily basis for those 100 days, dying in churches. Out of the womb of that pain, Kigali has now become the Mecca of those who want to do clean business. Paul Kagame and his comrades in arms are not Europeans. Paul Kagame is Rwandese. If Paul Kagame can do it, it can be done in Africa. Botswana, starting as a country whose only claim to fame is that they had more cows than there were human beings in Botswana. In 1966, they discovered diamond. They embraced democracy. They have demonstrated that one can serve and let others serve. It started with Seretse Khama. He gave power to Ketumile Masire, who handed over the baton to Festus Mogae, who handed over the baton to Ian Khama. And the country became the only country on the continent of Africa ever to have had a budget surplus. If Ian Khama can do it, we can do it. Our skin is innocent. There is nothing in our DNA that suggests that we cannot do it. We can do it, but we must make the decision to do it. One can go on and on, but those two examples are sufficient to demonstrate that it can be done. So the question is today, as we move forward, and as the African Union sitting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the leaders assembled there, looked at Africa and said, we lost the last 50 years. That this continent of Africa, with a population of 1.1 billion, only has a combined GDP of no more than 2 trillion United States dollars. And the 2 trillion United States dollars, Nigeria takes $500 billion, South Africa takes $345 billion, Egypt takes $300 billion, Morocco takes another $300 billion, Algeria takes another $145 billion. The rest is divided amongst all the African countries. We can do better because Germany, with a population of only 80 million, has a GDP of 4 trillion United States dollars. And the United States of America, with a population of no more than 300 million, has a GDP of $14 trillion. How did they do it? Was there a conspiracy in heaven? And angels were descended in the United States of America to build it? No. There were no angelic beings visiting the United States of America. There were no angelic beings visiting Germany. They made a solemn vow that we are going to make our country great. You only have to read the American Declaration of Independence to know we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the pursuit of happiness, the United States of America has now become a place where we seek refuge. I know many Africans who, when their wives are pregnant, they send them to the United States, that their children may be born in the United States, that they may become citizens of the United States of America. Why can't we do it here? Why must we Africans be humiliated at the embassies of Australia? Why must we be humiliated at the embassies of the United States of America? Why must we be humiliated at the embassy of the United Kingdom? Because we want to seek the almighty green card. Can't we make our own countries good? Don't we have the capacity to make our countries good? Was it not the divine instruction to go ye and subdue the world? Why have we allowed the world to subdue us? This is the question. And we can do it. And that is how I understand the leaders of Africa assembled in Addis Ababa when they said, having lost the 50 years or having punched below our weight in the last 50 years, going forward, we have Agenda 2063. And what is Agenda 2063? Agenda 2063 is Africa's wishful thinking, is Africa's dream. Dream, the way I know about them is that once you dream, you've got to wake up in order to ensure that you work for your dream to be realized. If you stay in dreamland, you'll go on dreaming until the second coming of Christ. And I'm submitting to us that we can make Africa great. through the young people here. We can make Africa's agriculture great. Africa can feed herself. How is it that my own country, Kenya, cannot feed herself? That my own country, Kenya, imports maize from Mexico. Yet before the birth of Christ in the Bible, we are told that there was a man called Joseph, and that he was the prime minister in Egypt of old, and that he said, during the days of plenty you shall store in order to take care of the days that are lean. How is it that we have silos? How is it that we have presidents who call themselves their excellencies? How is it that we have ministers of agriculture, and yet hunger visits us as if it were a visitor who surprised us? How is it? We can improve our agriculture if we begin to produce our own seed. But Africa allows our seed to be produced by Monsanto. Africa allows our seed to be produced by Syngenta. Africa allows our chemicals to be produced by Bayer of Germany. Oh, Africa. Alpha Ituri, the great Sudanese poet, once said, "Oh, Africa, art thou cursed?" We are not. We are our own curse. So we can improve our own agriculture. We can improve our own education. We can train our young men and women so that they are able to fit in the labor market. And once again, Rwanda leads in this regard. Rwanda is one of the few African countries where we do not need visas. We do not need work permits. How I wish that Paul Kagame could be the champion in Africa of this movement in a more visible way. Because what Africa needs is a leader who is a crusader. We can improve our education so that we do not send our children. What is there in Harvard that we do not have here? What is there in Cambridge that we do not have here? What is there in the Sorbonne that we do not have here? What is there in the Free University of Brussels that we do not have here? We have it all here. The only thing that we don't have is that we don't have self-belief. We do not believe that we can achieve it. Let us improve our education. You know, even our infrastructure we can do. I go to many African countries, including Rwanda, and I see the Chinese building. And the buildings are emblazoned in Chinese. Yet the Rwandese only speak Kinyarwanda. The Chinese know what they want. There is something to learn from the Chinese. I agree with Ronald Reagan that every country does what is in her best interest. The Chinese are doing what is in their best interest. Are Africans doing what is in their best interest? Many times, when I'm with my television set, I flip. Sometimes I have Radio Kinyarwanda. I do not understand Kinyarwanda, but I just listen to Paul Kagame addressing his people in Kinyarwanda, and I say, lo and behold, if we could all do this. If we could all do this, that the language that I want to learn is Kinyarwanda, is Hausa, is Kiswahili, so that we are not prisoners of languages from different parts of the world. We can use them without being imprisoned by them. We can achieve it culturally. What are we doing? In other words, I'm submitting to us that even the African journalists must now change. I know many journalists in Africa say we want freedom of press. And I have no quarrel with freedom of press. But freedom to do what? Joseph Momo of Sierra Leone once said that a journalist is like a soldier with an AK-47 in his hands. He can use it to defend or to destroy. You journalists, how do you use the power of the pen? Do you use it to defend or to destroy? The African journalist must think differently from the American journalist. The African journalist must think differently from the British journalist. The African journalist must think African and must remember that our countries are fragile. And there are things you can say in the United States of America. America will never be shaken, but you say them in Rwanda, Rwanda will shake. So we must use our power sparingly. Is it not William Shakespeare who said in a book called Measure for Measure, how great it is to have the power of a lion and the power of a giant, but to use it like a tyrant is wrong. You journalists have great power. Use it well. Agenda 2063, which promises us that we will have a middle-level economy, that there will be a railway line from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to one in Dakar in Senegal, that we'll have good roads from Cape Town in South Africa to Cairo in Egypt, that we'll have a railroad from Luanda in Angola to Suakin in Sudan. That is a promise that I admire, that the Democratic Republic of Congo will become the Silicon Valley of Africa, that Africa's capital possibly will be in Bangui in the Central African Republic, that we shall have one army, that we shall have one football team, that we shall have one athletic team, that there shall be no visas, that I shall have one currency, that when I come here, having flown for only 50 minutes with my Kenyan shilling, I'll not confront the Rwandese franc. And when I move to Congo, I confront yet another currency which has no value. We must create a continent where we have currencies that have value, that out of the 54 African currencies, there is not a single one that is called a hard currency. I suspect they are all soft. Ladies and gentlemen, I know their excellencies, the ambassadors are present here. I will not be diplomatic in my address to you, your excellencies. You are the representatives of your country. You have the direct line of your heads of state. We call you your excellencies. Roads are cleared for you in foreign countries. You enjoy things as diplomats. We are now sending you to go back. If you are from Sudan, go back to President Omar al-Bashir and tell President Omar al-Bashir that Africa needs you to lead her. Tell President Omar al-Bashir that he cannot be allowed to sleep when South Sudan is bleeding. Go out to Eritrea and tell Isaias Afewerki that ask them, how do you sleep? How do you sleep when the South Sudanese are dying? How do you sleep when Central African Republic are dying? How do you have wine when they are dying? How do you sleep when the British have to drop food to us in the greatest act of humiliation? How do we sleep? Go out there and tell them on the day of this African liberation that our independence means nothing if we still have to go with begging bows to Europe and America. There are two ways of being at the dinner table of civilization. I'm submitting to you that Africa is at the dinner table of civilization, not as a diner, but as a waiter. We must change that. I know in the next 2 days, in Sicily, in Italy, the great nations of the world are meeting, the G7. 4 African leaders have been invited. I know they are very excited. The excitement of adolescents invited to a dinner table. But what role are they going to play there? The best we are going to have of them is a photo opportunity with Donald Trump, with Theresa May, with Angela Merkel, with the young Macron, with Matteo Renzi, and with President Xi of China. Beyond that, nothing. Beyond that, nothing. That is the Africa whose independence we are celebrating today. The question is there something to celebrate? Is it an occasion for us to mourn or to celebrate? Yet I choose to celebrate. Because even the little things that we have done are worth celebrating. So let us celebrate the things that we have achieved, but let us remind ourselves that there is a lot more to be done and that we can do it. When I see young men and women who are seated here, I remember with the great Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe, who said, "Where are the young suckers that will grow when the old banana dies?" Are you the young suckers that will grow when the old banana dies? Even if you are not, I'm suggesting that you must be. Because in the way of nature, life is like a relay race. There is one who starts, hands over the baton, and when we win, the whole team celebrate. There is a sense in which life and leadership is like the ocean. Just like wave pushes wave in the ocean to renew the ocean, so must young blood replace old. I have no doubt in my mind that if we stay the course, we, the 1 billion of us, we who occupy 54 geographical spaces described as countries, we of the Negroid blood, and others who may not be Negroid but have chosen to be Africans and are Africans, who are inhabitants of Africa, we can do it. We must do it, because if we don't do it, Africa is doomed. Yet I believe that Africa will achieve it. God bless.